Hello, my name is Spencer, and in my podcast called The Dictionary, I literally read from the dictionary, but add in my personal comments and stupid jokes to make it more interesting. Episodes are family-friendly, short, and air every single day on basically every podcast platform. Come join me on this journey filled with edutainment.
Hello and welcome to How Did This Not Get Made?
This is the podcast all about the movies you never saw, the scripts that were never written, and the ideas that never even made it to the page. My name is David Spencer.
My name is Daniel Kaka.
I'm excited to get into what we are talking about because we're talking about a personal favorite of mine. We're talking about Treasure Planet 2.
Hidden somewhere in the farthest reaches of the galaxy, the loot of 1,000 worlds.
Walt Disney Pictures presents
Treasure Planet.
Robert Louis Stevenson's greatest adventure, Treasure Island, as it has never been seen before. The story of a dreamer
Pleasure to meet you, Jimmy. It's Jim.
who believed in a legend.
And you are? Wait, what about the treasure?
I don't want to lose you.
I'll make you proud.
Jim, this is our ship.
Get ready for adventure.
Brace yourself, Doctor.
Cyborg.
A story of friendship, courage,
Hold on to your lifeline, gents!
and destiny.
Got the makings of greatness in you.
I'm gonna set things right.
Pirates on my ship!
Don't get me started on pirates! We move now!
Treasure Planet.
Before we get into the story of it, though, I just kind of want to gauge. Dan, what's your experience and history with Treasure Planet?
I remember seeing it long ago. I don't believe I did see it in theaters. We may have rented it a while back, but well, the thing is, like, there was a lot of other Disney movies that kind of outshined Treasure Planet, at least in my mind. I know, like, Lilo and Stitch was one of them for sure, and Emperor's New Groove, seeing that this all kind of came out around the same time. But I remember Treasure Planet being as, like, one of those later Renaissance Disney movies. So it just kind of just stayed there as, like, oh, that's just another Disney film that was really interesting. And I kind of put it on par as, like, Atlantis, as far as, like, where this was in my head.
I'll say that I'll be the resident Treasure Planet fanboy. That, for whatever reason, when I saw that movie when I was a kid, I think I already liked Treasure Island and, like, sailing stories, but then I also really liked sci-fi. For whatever reason, the ideas in this movie absolutely hooked into my brain, and I just loved the vibes of it. I loved hanging out with the characters, and I was 100% on board with this. I remember when we had a VHS player, we had a bunch of Disney Renaissance films and early Disney films on VHS. But when we got a DVD player, I think the only two Disney movies we had were Treasure Planet and Lion King. And I would watch Treasure Planet all the time. Now that I've been online a little bit more and been around other Disney fandom more, it feels like there's a online Treasure Planet fandom that may be voracious. There's been times where I talk about, oh, I love Treasure Planet, and I get people reacting like I'm some sort of a toxic fan. I'm like, oh, I guess there's other people who are fans of this movie that may not be as cool online. And I guess it's good that I never got into the bigger fandom, but I don't know. I'm just kind of basing that off of reactions I've gotten on, like, Twitter and stuff. But I will say, a couple of years ago when Moana was about to come out, the El Capitan Theater, which, for those who don't know, is Disney's theater. Like, they own this theater on Hollywood Boulevard. It's a really nice theater with a really fun atmosphere, and they do a lot of cool extra stuff there. When Moana was coming out, they were doing a Ron and John retrospective, showing all of their films. And so I went to the Treasure Planet screening, as a massive fan, and they were doing a raffle giveaway, and the grand prize was this enormous poster board signed by Ron and John, and my ticket was called, and so now we have this giant Treasure Planet poster board hanging in our living room.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the story of Ron and John as well is definitely interesting because those are two absolute giants in Disney animation. I'm a huge fan of Treasure Planet, and somebody suggested doing Treasure Planet 2. I was immediately like, yes, let me talk about my weird emo space boy for another hour. Let me go ahead and start getting into these notes. So I'm going to give you a list of most of the Disney Animated Studios features from the start of the Disney Renaissance to the end of the 2D era. And there's a couple of films left off of this. And there's a reason for that. So these movies are Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Lion King, Pocahontas, Hunchback of Notre Dame, Hercules, Mulan, Tarzan, Emperor's New Groove, Atlantis, Lilo and Stitch, and Brother Bear. And what do all of these movies have in common? They all have sequels. So starting in the 90s and going into the beginning of the 2010s, Disney loved to make direct-to-video sequels for all of its movies. Have you watched any of these direct-to-video sequels of these or even any of the earlier Disney films that they did, like Cinderella?
I've seen a handful of them. I remember the Beauty and the Beast kind of sequel. It's kind of like the 1.5, I guess, is what it is, like what they did during Christmas or something. And I remember the Pocahontas one and the Little Mermaid, I remember. And then Lion King 1.5, I remember that being a big deal. And
oh, yeah. I remember really loving Lion King 1.5.
Yeah.
Timon, what are you doing?
I'm fast-forwarding to the part where we come in.
But you can't go out of order.
Au contraire, my porcine pal. I've got the remote.
But everyone's gonna get confused. We gotta go back to the beginning of the story.
We're not in the beginning of the story.
Yes, we were the whole time.
Yeah, but they don't know that.
Then why don't we tell them our story?
That was such a goofy movie. Not to be confused with... I've seen a handful of these. Like, most of them, I hardly remember. Things like, you were saying Pocahontas 2 and Little Mermaid 2. I don't think I could name a single plot point other than, like, the one-sentence description, but I know I've seen them. The one I remember watching that really stuck out as being awful to me was Fox and the Hound 2.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Now, a friendship will be tested.
What's eating you? Ever since you've joined that band, you've changed. You're never around anymore. It's either them or me.
I guess Lilo and Stitch 2 is another one I watched, but there's like 3 different Lilo and Stitch 2s that are unconnected. Cinderella 3 being like, we're just going to go into just a crazy genre town. The sequels are at their most successful when they're not trying to be faithful to the source material and they're just trying to go off and do their own thing. So this whole thing started in the early 90s. Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg had many goals in mind when Eisner became CEO of Disney. Not only did they want to revitalize the film side of animation, but they also had a priority to make Disney a powerhouse in television. In the late 80s and early 90s, they had a solid lineup of the Disney Afternoon, which included shows like DuckTales and Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers. They also started to produce television series based off of their popular films. They made the Little Mermaid animated series, also known as The One with the Crab Experiments. And they started working on adapting Aladdin for the small screen as well. The plan was for the series to premiere with a multi-part event helmed by producers Tad Stones and Alan Zaslav. As they were putting the pieces together, the producers were blown away by some of the early animation they were receiving out of their Australian animation studio, which, Kyle, you had a lot of praise for as well. So they started pushing to release this as a straight-to-video movie. Eisner did not like this idea because at the time, straight-to-video meant either bad R-rated action, slasher movies, or porn. And he did not want to cheapen Disney's brand.
Wasn't Disney involved in the adult film industry for a little bit, like in the 80s and 90s?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I never heard that.
It's kind of like when they make a separate studio, or like they name a different studio, like Touchstone or Miramax or something like that.
I never heard that before.
Editor Dan here, just to clarify Disney's involvement with adult entertainment. So according to the book Disney, the Mouse Betrayed, in 1989, Walt Disney Pictures and Television, they invested in a service called Viewer's Choice, which was like a pay-per-view service for anyone that wanted to watch any movies that were theatrically released. But later on, after the investment was made, the president of Viewer's Choice decided to include softcore pornography onto the service. So that is Disney's connection with the adult entertainment industry. So in a way, they were kind of betrayed, thus the name of the book, Disney, the Mouse Betrayed.
Iser is not a fan of this idea, but it'll shock no one. Do you know who was a fan of this money-making idea, regardless of whether or not it would cheapen the brand? Jeffrey Katzenberg.
Of course, Katzenberg.
And so Katzenberg decided that they should release it as Aladdin 2: The Return of Jafar to VHS in 1994. And it was a really big hit for them. It was made with a $5 million budget, and while VHS sales are not something we can get like hard numbers on in the same way it's easy to do with movie ticket sales, by some estimates, it has grossed more than $300 million since its release. So this is a massive, massive financial success for them, given how low of a budget the thing is.
Yeah, that's a big return.
Absolutely. I mean, it makes sense because if you ever hang out with kids or try to entertain kids, their favorite thing to do is just watch their favorite movie over and over and over and over and over again. And it's because they lock into these characters and they want to see these characters over and over again. So a straight-to-video sequel makes perfect sense because, hey, kids, you like this character, we're going to give you more of that character. They don't have to put a lot of thought into it, which is partly why Disney sequels are such a mixed bag, because some people will obviously care about it, but the studio, they don't need it to be a great movie. They're just like, let's just make another one because kids are going to watch whatever, as long as we got them with the initial release. This launched into one of Disney's most profitable ventures, the straight-to-video sequels. A variety of different departments in Disney later consolidated into Disney Toon Studios, produced sequels to many of Disney's biggest films, including basically all of the Disney Renaissance films. With kids' insatiable desire to keep watching the characters they already know, these movies sold like gangbusters. Nearly every single one of them had a budget less than $10 million and earned more than $100 million in return.
Wow.
If you go back to that list I made at the beginning, there's only a few movies that came out after Beauty and the Beast that did not get the direct-to-video sequel treatment. There's Rescuers Down Under and Fantasia 2000, which is because those two are already sequels. There's Disney's first CGI movie, which would have been too expensive. Home on the Range. Obviously, nobody's going to get a sequel for Home on the Range. And then, of course, the subject of today's episode, Treasure Planet. So this is the only original film in this long span of the end of Disney's 2D animation that did not get a direct-to-video sequel. But of course, this was not always the plan. Otherwise, we wouldn't be recording this podcast today. To get into the story of that, I want to talk a little bit about the story of Treasure Planet, because that story is pretty fascinating. We're going to have to dive into the story of Ron Clements and John Musker. Ron Clements began his animation career with an apprenticeship under animator Frank Thomas and got his first work in Disney features being a character animator on The Rescuers and Pete's Dragon. John Clements worked under him in this department and quickly became a friend and collaborator. They began working as story artists on The Black Cauldron, but due to its troubled production, ended up moving off the project. So Ron Clements pitched an adaptation of the children's book, The Basil of Baker Street, as an alternate project, and he and Musker became co-directors on The Great Mouse Detective, which was their first film for Disney.
Who are you? What? Oh. Basil at Baker Street, my good fellow.
I've never seen, but I've always heard people refer to it fondly. This was an odd time for Disney, the end of the odd what would Walt have done era. During the production of The Great Mouse Detective, Michael Eisner was appointed CEO of Disney, and he held a gong show meeting with some of the biggest creatives at Disney to bring pitches for their next slate of films. Have you ever heard of the gong show meeting?
No, I know what the gong show is, but I haven't heard of the gong show meeting.
Basically, Eisner and Katzenberg wanted everybody at Disney to come with their pitches, and they were basically getting immediate yeses or nos right there on the spot.
Oh, wow.
So there were a number of movies pitched there, including Oliver Twist, but with cats and dogs, which Eisner and Katzenberg loved. That was their favorite project. John Musker pitched a modern, edgy retelling of Little Red Riding Hood, which they also said yes to.
So she starts in with, what big eyes you have. Well, better to see you with. What big ears you have. Well, better to hear you with. What big teeth you have. Well, by now we got that rhythm thing going, you know? So I say the better to eat you with. I mean, geez, just give the whole thing away, right? Oh, I'm a moron. And so, of course, she starts screaming.
Oh, this has Garrison Keillor and Mia Farrow and Fabio? What? Adam West, Don Rickles? This sounds amazing. In the research I was doing, I just kind of saw that it was something they said yes to and developed for a little bit, and then it didn't really end up going anywhere. But I didn't know they even made a short about it. That's awesome.
Oh.
So Ron Clements came in with two pitches, The Little Mermaid and Treasure Island in Space. But both pitches were rejected. Little Mermaid was deemed too similar to a recent Disney project, Splash. Treasure Planet got a no because Katzenberg had just come from Paramount, where they were currently producing a Star Trek movie based off of Treasure Island, which also was never made. This is kind of surprising to me. Eisner and Katzenberg both wanted to stay away from traditional fairy tales.
Yeah, that's strange, because that's what they're known for.
Yeah, and that ended up making the Disney Renaissance be so successful. Ron Clements kept pushing for Little Mermaid. Even though he got the Gong Show rejection, he kept pushing for it and eventually convinced Eisner to greenlight the project. And of course, The Little Mermaid was a massive success. It was Disney's highest grossing film since Walt was alive. And it really felt like Disney was back and Ron and John helped to bring it back. With that clout of, okay, we just directed Disney's biggest movie in years, they immediately began redeveloping their pitch for Treasure Planet, which was an idea that kind of started as like a throwaway thing just to have a bunch of ideas in a meeting, but quickly became something that they were getting really passionate about. And of course, Disney said no. So instead, Ron and John, though, were offered to direct again and were given the choice between three different projects. A Swan Lake movie, a movie that was titled King of the Jungle, which actually ended up becoming The Lion King, or Aladdin. They ended up choosing Aladdin because they had worked with Alan Menken and Howard Ashman on Little Mermaid. Those two were already developing the soundtrack for Aladdin. I don't know how common of a thing this is for Disney films to be working on the soundtrack before you even have directors in place. Aladdin had a really massive soundtrack originally that was cut way down, and then a lot of those songs ended up in the Broadway show. Was it Katzenberg hearing about The Thief and the Cobbler? Is that the seedling of the idea? Weird tidbit about Aladdin is one of those songs that was cut and then later added into the Broadway musical was the song Proud of Your Boy, which is then the inspiration of the name of the far-right group, the Proud Boys. So that's fun. At the time, Aladdin was seen as a big gamble, in large part because of Robin Williams and kind of the wackiness of the tone. Disney was back in the Renaissance with their two biggest hits of Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast, and both of those were far more typical fairy tale fare. And to have a cartoon character that's voiced by a living cartoon character as a main part of their next movie, that was seen as a big risk for Disney.
Wasn't it true that when it came to trying to get Robin Williams into Aladdin, that he was hesitant on actually being the genie at first. And then they did like a test with him where they actually had him improv in front of the...
Oh, I thought it was that they took some of his stand-up and animated some of his stand-up and showed it to him.
Yeah, that's what it was.
We took a comedy album of Robin's, and Eric Goldberg, great genius animator, took a little stretch of comedy off the album as a sales pitch, really, did some animation to it.
But first, before we do the play, I'd like to talk about the very serious subject of schizophrenia. No, he doesn't. Shut up, let him talk!
And so he came in, we brought him in, we showed him some storyboards, and we showed him Eric's test.
Once again, if there are any little children here tonight, we've used these words in a sentence.
Whenever it comes to co-directors, there's so many different ways that they share in creativity and how they use their different ideas together. And so this is just pure speculation from me, but if you go off their pitches from The Gong Show, I love that Ron Clements was coming in with, here's some traditional fairy tales, and John Musker was coming in with, let's do wacky, edgy Little Red Riding Hood. And I kind of like thinking about how Aladdin has a lot of both of that in there. It's got the wacky modern comedy combined with your typical fairy tale fare.
Welcome to Agrabah, city of mystery. Of enchantment. The funniest merchandise this side of the River Jordan on sale today. Come on down.
I mean, we kind of had that when we went over Kingdom of the Sun, what was going on there, although the pairing was more confrontational, but it seemed like they brought in a second director to be like, hey, this guy is like too straight-laced. We need to like goof it up a little bit.
Well, Aladdin came out and it ended up being an enormous hit for Disney. The first animated film ever to gross over $200 million. Ron and John had once again done it for Disney and given them their biggest hit yet. And what did they want to spend their new creative capital on? They wanted to pitch Treasure Planet again. But once again, Katzenberg said no. But he made a deal with them. One more commercial success. Just give me one more, guys, and then your passion project is going to be a go. This final time is when they directed Hercules, a movie that wasn't a smash hit, but was still a success. There's some reports that behind the scenes, Katzenberg absolutely hated the idea of Treasure Planet. One quote I found said, Katzenberg did not like the film's concept. He thought it was simply a bad idea to take a classic adventure tale of a young boy's coming of age and place it in space.
Isn't that just Star Wars, though?
And I know, right? Like, I feel like that's kind of a weak criticism of the idea, and maybe there was something else that he didn't like about it. Ron and John were also frustrated about their project being continually rejected, that they even went behind Katzenberg's back to Roy Disney, who then in turn convinced Eisner that this is a film that Disney should make. There's already a lot of tensions with Eisner, Roy Disney, and Katzenberg. In 1994, Katzenberg was fired from Disney, so right as they were just starting to work on Hercules. In 1995, Ron and John were finishing up Hercules, and they were in negotiation to continue their contract with Disney for 7 more years, but they stipulated in their contract that Disney would finally make their passion project, and Treasure Planet would officially go into pre-production. I gotta be honest, I need to read the Disney War, something about all of the crazy behind-the-scenes things happening with Disney at the time, because I know you could probably make an entire podcast just discussing the power struggles of Disney in the 90s, because I know that that is a big story. I would also love to see like a prestige HBO miniseries about it. Give me like a Succession, but with the Disney CEOs. So, principal animation began in the year 2000, utilizing new developments in CG animation to be able to move the camera in new ways. The vision was bold and specific, a take on sci-fi that had much more in common with fantasy and the vibrant age of exploration. Obviously, I can see when the story doesn't work as much for people, but I feel like it's undeniable how good the movie looks and how cool those ships look and all the space. It's so cool, you guys. I love it. I love Treasure Planet.
This was also around the time the X Games were really big, and we just had Extremely Goofy movie, so And was it Rocket Power is on Nickelodeon at this point?
There was like a specific era in time where every animated film had a sequence that looked like surfing in some way. Like you got the Tarzan thing. Yeah.
I remember the X Games would have like a skydiving competition. And you immediately see that with the sky surfing. I don't know what they call it in the actual movie, but like Jim Hawkins is like sky surfing and he does that spin move. It looked like they had just taken X Games footage and just replicated that frame for frame.
Yeah. Like other Disney films at this time, while the movie was in production, they also began production on a sequel before the film was even released. So that way they would be ready with more exciting content for fans of the film.
That does make sense. If this has become the formula to be like, well, we're going to big movie and then straight to video, and you got to get on that as soon as possible, especially if it's an animated movie.
And I think this is something they did for Atlantis and for Lilo and Stitch, a lot of the other films of this time, where they were like, we know that we're going to make a straight to video movie because we've done it for literally every other project. So we want to make sure we get it out as soon as possible while people are still hyped up about the film they just saw.
Yeah, straight to video just seems inevitable, and it's already cheap enough as is. They already know that they're going to get the returns.
Yeah. During the promotion of the initial release of Treasure Planet, Disney Animation president Thomas Schumacher teased a sequel as well as a possible TV series. So it looked like that was something they were looking at doing. That also makes sense because they were doing TV series for so many of their films at the time. For the sequel, Disney hired June Falkenstein to direct. She had just come off of directing the successful Tigger movie, which was a movie that was produced by Disney Television Animation, but was such high quality that Disney decided to give it a wide theatrical release. Have you ever seen the Tigger movie?
I haven't, but I remember those previews.
Yeah.
I remember it being strange that there was a Winnie the Pooh movie actually going into theaters, because I don't think that really happened before.
Yeah. The Tigger movie got moderately praised from critics, and it earned $90 million on a $15 million budget. This is something I saw about this movie, and I couldn't confirm that this was untrue, but it seems like this is the only Disney animated film that got a wide domestic theatrical release that was directed solely by a female director, of which Turning Red would have been the second until it got relegated to streaming. Which is kind of wild that it's the year 2022 and the Tigger movie is literally the only one directed solely by a female director. We've had a couple of others that were co-directed by a female director. So she was tapped to direct the Treasure Planet sequel. The sequel would have began where the first film left off, Jim Hawkins heading to the Royal Interstellar Academy. So I'm going to go into a little bit of a plot synopsis here for Treasure Planet 2 and what we would have seen. The sequel would begin where the first film left off, Jim Hawkins heading to the Royal Interstellar Academy. And there he would meet a new character, Kate, who would be his rival/love interest. This kind of seems like a thing for Disney sequels where if the main character didn't have a romantic plot line in the initial release, we're absolutely going to give them one in the sequel. I'm thinking of like Hunchback of Notre Dame, where it's just like, we have to give Quasimodo a girlfriend. I haven't seen that, but I've heard that might be like the worst straight-to-video sequel. I've heard lots of terrible things about that movie. So the two would start with a rivalry relationship where they each fought to be the top of the class. Captain Amelia was the headmaster of the academy and was also unveiling her new ship, the Centurion, which was designed by Dr. Doppler and piloted by Ben. I can already feel like this movie would have definitely been worse if Ben was a presence throughout the entire film instead of only having to deal with him for like 10 minutes at the end.
This plot sounds like Top Gun.
It does! Oh, it absolutely does. This is another thing I know gets commented on a lot about Disney films of this era, especially like after the success of Robin Williams. Every movie's got to have that wacky character voiced by a comedian, and sometimes it works, but usually it's Ben or the gargoyle in Hunchback, where it's just, no, we don't need this. Anyway, now there is also a new pirate on the scene, the ruthless Ironbeard, who has almost completely replaced himself with metal and robotic parts. There's a lot of concept art you can see online for this movie. I love the Ironbeard concept art. I think it looks so cool. It's like his mouth is like a circle opening up, kind of like an aperture.
Oh, yeah. It's almost like half of his face is a garbage disposal.
Yeah. So with a band of pirates, he captures the Centurion while Jim and Kate are still on board. Jim and Kate manage to escape the ship and then try to find a way to steal it back. Jim suggests that in order to find a pirate, you need a pirate, and they should go find Long John Silver.
Bringing such fine-looking distinguished gents to grace my humble galley. Had I known, I'd have tucked in my shirt.
Silver agrees to help, and they track the ship to a prison asteroid called Botany Bay, where Ironbeard is breaking through the security systems to release the prisoners. Jim, Kate, and Silver sneak aboard, and Silver reveals his true plan to steal the Centurion for himself. And he asks Jim to join him. Can never trust a pirate. The three are then discovered, and a fight breaks out, but they manage to sneak off again while the prisoners of Botany Bay are climbing aboard. Which, by the way, it seems really odd to me that this movie is just constantly sneaking onto the ship, sneaking off of the ship, sneaking back onto it, sneaking back off of it. Now, when they get off, Kate is angry that Jim would consider stealing the Centurion and storms off. And Jim is angry at her as well for storming off, but Silver convinces him to go after her. He reveals his own past, and we get a flashback about how he messed up his own romantic relationship and how that led to his life of piracy. The three reconcile and fix Silver's ship while Ironbeard is planning a pillage and murder spree with his new ship and crew. Just gonna try to kill everybody, I guess, because that's what pirates do.
It's a pirate.
Another exciting battle ensues, which ends with Silver giving up his quote-unquote retirement fund. He had been holding onto a device with the power of a neutron bomb that he was planning to sell, but instead detonates it to defeat the pirates. Because, again, we're going to have Long John Silver go through the exact same character arc as the first movie of giving up riches to save Jim Hawkins.
He learned nothing.
He departs from Jim and Kate, who go on to graduate a few years later with honors, while Silver watches from the sideline. So that's the whole story treatment for this. I believe a script was written, but I don't think you can find copies of that script online, or at least I couldn't when I was searching for it. It seems like there are some cool ideas in here. Certainly like Ironbeard. I like the idea of going to like a prison asteroid and finding a new band of ruthless pirates, but the Long John Silver having the exact same character arc is kind of lame. I don't know yet what to think about Kate. I feel like that's something that would have had a lot up to like how she was written and how she was acted as to whether or not like I feel like that character would work for me. After we watched Treasure Planet and the El Capitan, I remember talking with some other people there about what would be a cool Treasure Planet sequel. And I thought it would be cool if the sequel was Jim's first task is going and hunting down Long John Silver, and that having to choose between going for the academy or his friend. It could have been a cool conflict. Mm-hmm. The sequel would have had a lot of the original cast returning, which is something they did a lot with these sequels. They already had Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Brian Murray, and Emma Thompson signed on. For the new character, Ironbeard, they cast Willem Dafoe.
Yeah.
Just coming off of his successful performance as Green Goblin.
The itsy bitsy spider went up the water spout. Down came the goblin and took the spider out.
He would have been great as a Disney villain.
Mm-hmm.
But they never cast Kate. I found an interview with June Falkenstein, which said that she couldn't even remember who they were considering to play Kate. On Thanksgiving weekend 2002, Treasure Planet hit theaters, and it was a critical and box office disappointment. Much to the chagrin of 10-year-old David, other people did not go for this film. So that came out the same weekend as The Chamber of Secrets, which was big competition.
Yeah.
And also another Disney film, The Santa Claus 2. So Disney was even competing against Disney. Speaking of like what movies it was released against, Lilo and Stitch had also come out just the previous summer. So we were like 6 months out from another Disney film. So I think that also could have contributed. But I think also it's just that people, they just didn't connect with it as much. Reviews for the movie praised the visual splendor and the imagination of the adventure, but they found that it lacked the charm of recent Disney films such as Lilo and Stitch. Roger Ebert gave it a 2.5 and called the sci-fi setting gimmicky. The movie made a disappointing $38 million domestically, off of, what was the budget for it?
The budget was $140 million.
They had $100 million loss on this film. So Disney gambled a lot on the passion project of two of their most talented directors, and unfortunately that gamble did not pay off. The Monday following Treasure Planet's first weekend in the box office, June Falkenstein and voice director Jamie Thomason were at the recording studio when they received a call from Disney. Treasure Planet 2 was being canceled. And Willem Dafoe was on his way to the recording studio to record for Ironbeard when they got the call. The crew was disappointed. They already had a ton of storyboards and concept art finished, and they were excited to see the project through. While Treasure Planet failed to leave an impact on general audience, it has become known as somewhat of a cult classic for some Disney fans named David Spencer, garnering a passionate fan base. June Falkenstein went on to be a storyboard artist for films such as Despicable Me, The Smurfs, and Lion King 2019, as well as she is currently the supervising director for Apple TV's Stillwater. Ron and John continue to have success with Disney, directing The Princess and the Frog, and most recently, Moana. Yeah, that is the story of Treasure Planet and Treasure Planet 2.
Something that I wanted to mention was that, along with Ron and John, there are two writers who are also associated with the project, which have left a substantial footprint in the movie industry. Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio, who we were talking about before with Godzilla. The movies that surrounded Treasure Planet, the one before was Shrek, and then right after Treasure Planet, they did another pirate movie, Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl.
Yeah, and I can totally see how the kind of sweeping adventure that Treasure Planet is trying to be. Like, it absolutely makes sense that this is written by the same team who wrote The Mask of Zorro and Aladdin, which makes a ton of sense. Oh, and they also wrote Aladdin and the King of Thieves. Oh, that's cool. Yeah. Would you have any interest in watching the sequel of Treasure Planet 2? As much as I love Treasure Planet, I don't need to have seen a Treasure Planet 2. It is kind of a bummer that it didn't get made, only because that makes it the only Disney film of this era that was unsuccessful enough that the sequel got canceled. But
I don't know if I'd be interested in seeing the sequel, but I just want to see Captain Ironbeard. Just like animated, just an animated Captain Ironbeard.
Just give me like an animation test of that. It's very clear that to Disney, these are just moneymakers and they don't have to be great. For the creative teams, some of them really care about the project and want to make it amazing. And for some of them, it's more of just a job. Not that people aren't always trying to do their best work, but I feel like you can tell how things like Lion King 1.5 may have had more passion behind the scenes based off of the way that interviews with June Falkenstein or the way the crew have talked about Treasure Planet 2. It is something that everybody was genuinely passionate about and excited about. It is a bummer that, maybe there could have been something really special about the sequel that we unfortunately didn't get. Well, that's going to go ahead and wrap up this episode on Treasure Planet 2. And then if you want to find more episodes of this podcast, you can go check out our website, pipedreampodcast.com, which is also the home of Come On Fahoogle Pods, as well as Escape from Walt Disney and Mystery Shack Look Back. While you're there, you can find links to all of our social media pages. We are on Twitter at How Did This Not Get Made? We're on Instagram at at HDTNGM, and you can send us your emails, notgetmade@gmail.com. Send us your corrections or suggestions for future episodes. While you're at the website, you can also find the link to our Patreon page. We are so thankful to all of our wonderful patrons who help keep this show and Come On Fahuquapods going, as well as all of those gracious donations have helped push us over our goal to create Pod Made You Special. That's going to go ahead and wrap us up. Thank you, everybody, so much for listening.
Thank you.